Welcome to American Education FM, everybody. I'm Dr. Sean Brooks. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to start here. Over on the website, the show website, AmericanEducationFM.com, under the Government Documents tab and also under the Education Documents tab on the PDF list of books, the 101 plus free PDF books that exists, is a link to a PDF book titled The Secret World Government or The Hidden Hand. I've read a number of pages from this already. It is interesting. I think that's putting it lightly. And I just want to read the introduction to this. This was written by a Major General Count Sharip Spiridovich. And here's the introduction. And again, this introduction was written by no way I get that first name, Herjulf Vikingson, if I'm saying that correctly, from Chicago on July 4th, of 1925. And here's what it says, quote, "This book is mostly about Jews. It is not against the Jews. These painstaking researches have been made in order to rewrite history with conscience, quote unquote, as Lamartine urged, as Washington Irving admonished. The results are presented to the thinking public to enlarge its intelligence, not its prejudice. The book should appeal to Jew and Gentile alike, and they may join hands in purging society of its enemies, be the Jewish plotters or gentle participants. Each group more contemptible than the other according to the point of contemplation. The Jews should bring a bay to the Satanists, quote unquote, who corrupt the countries in which they have found asylum. The Gentiles should make harmless every Judas who accepts the bribes of the Jews. Together, they should eliminate from authority the man who, quote unquote, sells his birthright equally with him, who taking advantage of his weaker brother, quote, buys it for a mess of pottage, unquote. But he that is greatest among you shall be your servant, St. Matthew. Count Sharip Spiridovich springs from Norse gentility. His remotest ancestor on record was Prince Rurik, who being one of the worthies, quote unquote, of his time, was in 862 called by the Slavic people to Novgorod, where he founded a dynasty and gave Russia its name. Nordic tradition, coupled with exceptional education and training, have given to General Spiridovich the spiritual ardor and constructive impulse and the extraordinary perseverance required to make his vast knowledge serve the exigencies of the present by his peculiar power to forecast the future, but it devolves upon the individual reader to make practical application of it by refusing to participate in the practices which engage, quote, enemies of humanity, unquote. A Chicago rabbi recently said, quote, we have been told long enough you cannot change human nature, but I say to you, human nature can be changed, and, what is more, human nature must be changed, unquote. And how may it be changed? A Danish philosopher has given the formula. He speaks of traditions of caste and undeniable obstacles to the realization of freedom and equality, but suggests how these obstacles may be converted into opportunities, saying, quote, in the nature of inequality there is a secret. Equality becomes inhuman under forced abolition of inequality. Inequality becomes inhuman when we neglect to promote equality. It is upon inequality, as a basis, that equality must be reared. The agony of society arises from this simple thesis being misunderstood on opposite sides, unquote. These are the jewels of thought of a century. They blind the evil eye of Bolshevism. May each reader set them firmly in the diadem of his deeds. Count Tolstoy prophesied, quote, a man shall come from the north to save civilization, unquote. Is that man Sharip Spiridovich? Who knows? Read his book, and the world will never again seem the same to you, unquote. Again, this is approximately 206 pages. It is available, again, free PDF on my website, and it's interesting. Again, it asks a lot of very serious questions, dives back into history a great deal. And yeah, lots of food for thought. I'll just kind of put it that way, leave it there. If you're interested in checking it out, I highly recommend it. Now, I just want to make mention of basically a couple of geopolitical things just kind of right off the top here and just real fast. First of all, I really found it interesting last week that a lot of people, again, continue to out themselves. And when given the opportunity, they, of course, do this on their own accord without any help, certainly from the public. I think that Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky was one of these individuals. Last week, he again decided to engage in this back and forth game with Senator Kennedy from Louisiana, having to do with wanting to continue to fund basically Congress and make sure that congressional leaders and elected officials still get their paychecks. Even though Senator Kennedy put forth a couple of measures basically saying that if government, again, isn't open, then why is it that elected officials are still getting paid? Again, it's a political game. It's a political back and forth, but what it really is showing, I think, is that there is a bit of a divide, certainly within those on the seeming proverbial right of the political spectrum, even though, again, they're all heads of the same snake one way or another. But again, it's an interesting back and forth. But again, for Rand Paul to immediately come out and say, well, wait a minute, we're the ones that are actually doing all of the work because we're the ones engaging in these debates back and forth, trying to open the government and XYZ. Again, I'm with Dr. Robin McCutcheon on this one as well. And she's openly said this again, most recently, I believe, on Dave Janda's radio show. But it doesn't matter how long the government stays closed. I mean, it really doesn't. A lot of individuals, again, on their own accord, are going to go and find work elsewhere. I will say this, however, it does slow down the wheels of justice when it comes to those of us out here in the private sector, so to speak, or certainly I should say those in the public, who are trying to get the federal government to act on behalf of us against government. Because again, when you seek to file a particular form for a particular agency, like a 3-letter agency, certainly at the federal level, then everything stops. Or you can't even file with them because, again, everything stops. Now, fortunately, when it comes to some local issues here, I got all of my paperwork in due time, I should say, certainly again before the government shut down. But now that it's closed, it begs the question, well, who's actually looking at it right now and what's actually going on? So, again, unfortunately, it does slow some things down. But at the same time, keeping it closed isn't a bad thing either, because the most worthless will typically leave, while those, again, who know that this is temporary and that there's good work that needs to be done, again, on behalf of the American people, those people will typically stay. Again, many of them can see the larger picture, which is a good thing. So it'll be interesting to see how long this lasts. Again, it's not a bad thing. It just unfortunately slows the wheels of justice, again, for those of us that are attempting to hold the guilty accountable. And we need 3-letter agency help to do so. And of course, in order for them to do what they need to do, they have to get paid in order to do it. And there you go. So again, we'll see how long it lasts. Okay. The next thing is this. I wanted to spend a minute on James Watson, who passed away here the other day. And Dr. Watson was one of the co-founders or co-discoverers of the double helix DNA strand. And of course, the imagery certainly that we've come to know when it comes to examining DNA and what DNA looks like. He also examined numerous studies over the course of his career that specifically have had to do, of course, with genetics, and then had to do, again, a great deal with demographics and geographic location of different races of individuals, and how race specifically, and specifically IQ, can be and is race-based and is a genetic factor. Now, him making those statements pissed off a lot of people, and unfortunately so, because again, they're not interested in facts, they're just interested in feelings. So they hear things like race, IQ, and differences, and those 3 words put together in a sentence, and then they lose their minds. Thereby, of course, proving that quote-unquote science, as they like to say, isn't really what it is intended to be. They don't really apply the scientific method, whereas someone like a Dr. James Watson certainly did. So I want to read this abstract because this was an article that was written back and published in 2008 by a James Malloy. And it was titled the following here. This is, again, you can look this up on PubMed. Medical Hypothesis is the editorial. And it was titled, James Watson Tells the Inconvenient Truth, Faces the Consequences. It says the following here, quote, recent comments by the eminent biologist James Watson concerning intelligence test data from sub-Saharan Africa resulted in professional sanctions as well as numerous public condemnations from the media and the scientific community. Now again, the fact that they call it a scientific community right there should prove to you that it's not about the truth. It's just about the masses and how the masses feel about a particular thing. It goes on, it says, they justified these sanctions to the public through an abuse of trust by suggesting that intelligence testing is a meaningless and discredited science, that there is no data to support Dr. Watson's comments that genetic causes of group differences in intelligence are falsified logically and empirically, and that such differences are already accounted for by known environment factors. None of these arguments are correct, much less beyond legitimate scientific debate. Dr. Watson was correct on all accounts. Number one, intelligence tests do reveal large differences between European and sub-Saharan African nations. Two, the evidence does link these differences to universally valued outcomes, both within and between nations. And three, there is data that suggests these differences are influenced by genetic factors. The media and the larger scientific community punished Dr. Watson for violating a social and political taboo, but fashioned their case to the public in terms of scientific ethics. Again, they think that telling the truth and referencing facts, both again by just looking at a map, looking at cultures, anthropology, and of course discovery and invention, that all of that, and examining all of those elements, and taking all of that into consideration is somehow not scientific. That's exactly what science is about. It's about taking in all of the evidence and then arriving at a conclusion. It goes on, it says, this necessitated lying to the public about numerous scientific issues to make Watson appear negligent in his statements, a gross abuse of valuable and fragile public trust in scientific authority. See, they give it away too with their use of the word authority. It wraps up and says, lies and a threatening coercive atmosphere to free inquiry and exchange are damaging to science as an institution and to scientists as individuals. While voicing unfashionable hypotheses is not damaging to science, the ability to openly voice and argue ideas in good faith that are strange and frightening to some is, in fact, integral to science. Those that have participated in undermining this openness and fairness have therefore damaged science, even while claiming to protect it with the same behavior, unquote. Again, a person can use their eyes, and they can see a great deal of how all of this, of course, is true. 100%. Observational science, of course, is a skill. It's an innate ability that we all have. Every single human being has it if they have a brain in their skull. And they can think that there is no doubt, again, that if the IQ test, so to speak, is to be taken seriously, which I've seen plenty of papers that proves and research done that it's not necessarily the most viable measurement, but it is a measurement. So since it's sort of a widely used measurement, we'll just stick with it for the case of this argument. But that if you look at, again, many civilizations, there has really only been a civilization that has built a great deal of the world that we live in and seek to maintain it without, of course, destroying it. Not to say, again, that the white race hasn't destroyed plenty. They certainly have. And in fact, they have no qualms about destroying the very thing that they will build, certainly for profit. And certainly, of course, with Jewish lobby influence behind them in the interest of sharing said profit. But even so, it's certainly worth noting that within K-12 schools and college and university settings, certainly at HBCUs, this is exactly where you have these individuals running around campuses screaming, specifically Black Americans, screaming that they built everything, that they're responsible for everything, that America wouldn't exist if it weren't for them, and so on and so forth. This is what these institutions have to tell them, because the exact opposite is actually true. Again, it's not to say that hard work doesn't exist, not to say that people haven't contributed, certainly to a larger society, and again, continuing to maintain certain societies. But I've even played the audio in the war videos before, where an African individual who lives on the continent of Africa, in one country, I'm not sure which, I forget which, but it doesn't matter. Either way, he openly says to a couple of American, basically Black Americans, he openly says, so you're from this particular country, or you have family members who live in this country in Africa? And the woman says, yes. And then he says, what word exists in their language for the word maintenance? And then she says some word, and he says, no. He says, that's not maintenance. She mentioned another word. And then he says, what does the word maintain mean? And she says it, and then he says, right, but you only know that because you understand the English language. He said, in your African language, in your African country, they don't know the word maintain because the word doesn't exist. So again, when Western or Northern European white culture brings an invention to the continent of Africa in a country, by and large, they don't maintain it when that civilization leaves or when those white individuals leave, because they don't know how to maintain the thing that has been built for them in the first place. There is no doubt that that is an IQ difference. There is no doubt that that is a cultural difference. There is no doubt that that is a genetic difference. I would take it a step further, and I would simply say that another very easy observational element or phenomenon that I think anybody can see, although clearly not everybody can see it, is that if you look around at today's society, those that are continuously learning are the ones who have higher IQs than those who do not. A great deal of people have a limit, and they've reached their limit. They are not interested in continuing to read, research, listen, ask questions. It goes back to the inner monologue thing that we've been, of course, bringing up with regularity here on the show for quite some time, certainly within the last week or so. But that right there, again, they are not utilizing their frontal cortex the way that they possibly could because they're operating on the smallest portion of their brain, which is emotion. You see that across the entire political divide, and in fact, you see it on the right and the left. It's not just singular to the left. You also see it, of course, on the so-called right and those who identify as being people on the right. They show their inability to learn, not understanding that there is no right and left, but there is actually an ascension that takes place, which is a higher order of thinking that, again, exceeds that ridiculous left-right paradigm. And again, the business of looking into race differences and cultural differences, specifically, again, pertaining to intelligence overall, and certainly application of said intelligence, is not a new thing. I remember, I think it was even before this show, if I'm not mistaken, although it's quite possible I did bring it up on the show many years ago. But I remember coming across a story and a study of a female college professor or university professor, and she, again, very specifically, almost mimicked Dr. Watson's work, and again, tested a great deal of individuals from other geographic areas, but did so based on race. And she came to the exact same conclusion. She came to the conclusion, again, that different races have different levels of intelligence, and as a result, if those individuals, again, with lower levels of intelligence are around other individuals of the same culture, race, genetic makeup, and intelligence, then, of course, they're going to mimic one another's behavior. And if that behavior and application of said behavior is limited, then they're not going to create anything. They're just going to do what the other is doing. Hence, of course, the NPC behavior that we see, again, among both the right and the left. You can pick any event even that's happened certainly in recent months, and you can basically arrive at that exact same conclusion. A person on the right or even the left criticizing the right could say something like, well, look at the Charlie Kirk event. Look at all the people who attended that Arizona rally inside of the stadium, and that huge WWE event and XYZ. That seems rather strange. And then, of course, somebody on the right would look at someone on the left and say, well, they're a heartless bastard and they don't know anything one way or another, and all they want to do is just kill everybody. Well, they're both wrong. Because it's not everybody within a particular group, of course. Same thing again with any particular race. It isn't everybody of that race. That would be impossible. Because there's different genetic makeup among those individuals. Just because they share a skin tone doesn't necessarily mean, again, that they're capable of the same kinds of ingenuity or thought or ability to learn or what have you than other members of their same race. Let me give you a couple of examples here. This comes from fascinatinghistory.org. It says, in the early 1700s and early 1800s, scientists in Europe and the Americas studied race science, quote unquote, the idea that humankind is divided into separate and unequal races. They tried to explain the contradiction between the belief in human equality expressed during the American and French revolutions and the emergence of slavery in the United States and several European countries. Prominent scientists from many countries built upon each other's conclusions, and they included the following. Carlos Linnaeus, if I'm saying that right, an 18th century Swedish naturalist, was among the first scientists to sort and categorize human beings. He regarded humanity as a species within the animal kingdom and divided the species into 4 varieties: European, American, Asiatic, and African. And then it says Petrus Camper, an 18th century Dutch professor of anatomy, believed that the ancient Greeks had come closer than other people to human perfection. He used Greek status to establish standards of beauty and ranked human faces by how closely they resembled his ideal. Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, a German scientist, coined the term Caucasian in 1795, quote, to describe the variety of mankind that originated on the southern slopes of Mount Cassius, unquote, along Europe's eastern border. He claimed it was the, quote, original race, and therefore the most beautiful, unquote. Samuel George Morton, an American anthropologist, theorized in the mid-1800s that intelligence is linked to brain size. After measuring a vast number of skulls from around the world, he concluded that whites have larger skulls than other races and are therefore superior, unquote. Now again, is that genetic? Yeah, it certainly is. It's not necessarily singular to one particular race, but it is genetic. This is a fact. This is centuries old. This has been proven for quite some time. Again, it isn't discriminatory either. Somebody listening to this who's remarkably naive would say something like, whatever, that's racist. Well, that right therein lies the problem. That's one of the origins of that ridiculous made-up term, is the scientific community, quote unquote, took these factual findings of anthropology, race, DNA, genetics, all of it, geographic location, and they would disagree with it with their feelings. They wouldn't disagree with it with the frontal cortex of their brains if it was actually activated. But they would take the smallest portion of their brain, they would look at this information and just be overridden, basically, with just false feelings. Well, this seems disrespectful. Well, this isn't taking into account XYZ. Well, again, look at where people live. Look at the condition and state of the locations of, again, where people live. It's not to say that individuals who happen to have darker skin don't do particular things that individuals, again, with lighter skin do. That's again, it's clearly not everybody. It's more of a surroundings mentality as well, which again is more cultural than genetic. But genetics specifically impacts culture as well, directly and indirectly. For example, say you had a suburb. The vast majority of individuals who tend to live in the suburbs happen to be white. So if the vast majority of individuals, for example, live in suburbs, and there are characteristics of those individuals who live in suburbs to do particular things, let's say for the sake of argument, again, going back to a previous word that I used earlier, maintenance. The business of maintenance and maintaining one's own property within a suburb. First of all, when one does that, you can see other people's property because you're in a suburb and you're in relatively close proximity, close enough to be able to look at a person's lawn, for example, from a distance, and not even that far of a distance, and be able to understand whether or not they maintain it properly. Now, what does, of course, that mean? What does maintaining a property look like? Well, everybody has a different definition as to what that looks like. Some people think it's as basic as keeping your lawn mowed, once a week or something along those lines. Other people, of course, they take it up a level. They make sure that their house is painted. They make sure that this is in order, that that's in order, that the ground is weeded, and a number of other things. They go to another step and another level to make sure that things look a particular way because they enjoy looking at it and making it look that particular way. Now, much like the broken window theory, if you break a window in a vacant building and you leave it broken, the vast majority of individuals walking past that building will see the broken window, and instead of fixing it, they will continue to throw rocks through the other windows, thereby breaking them, giving off the perception that the broken window means that the entire building is not only vacant, but you're allowed to vandalize it. And then it will slowly, of course, just disintegrate over time. And then before you know it, every single window is broken and the entire building looks run down. It's no different, again, with proximity and culture, but also with race. Because once you move out of the suburbs and you enter more of an urban environment, it gets dirtier. And then, of course, when that's the case, and then you look at the race of the individual that lives in said environment, geographically speaking, it tends to not be white. Now, you can make the shift to a different continent. You can go to Africa, same thing. If they're surrounded by individuals that do not maintain, and they're surrounded by individuals, again, that don't maintain properly, let alone understand the definition of the word, let alone the word maintain, or even improve, or even repair or fix, then by default, everything will disintegrate, certainly over the course of time. Another example, you could point to these Habitat for Humanity homes that exist all over the United States. It's not long before these Habitat for Humanity homes become dumps. Why? Because the individuals who are given them don't know how to maintain a home. And in some cases, race and genetics is involved in that, whether, again, the home is maintained or it isn't. And if they happen to live in close proximity around or close to individuals who either know how to maintain said property or don't, then that's going to have an influence as to whether or not those individuals living on that property do that in one fashion or another, on one side or another. And again, to prove, yet again, that it's not always a race-based, certainly a race or genetic-based decision, or even race-based. It could be just intelligence from genetics, of course. But you can have individuals, again, of the same race, living right next door to each other, and one side knows how to maintain better than the other side of a property line, we'll say, for the sake of this particular story, which is a true story. There are two neighbors who live in the town where I live, not in my neighborhood, but they live in town. And both of the homes are older, and that's, putting it mildly, but they're older, and they were starting to look run down. One of the homes was bought by somebody else, and as soon as they bought it, they immediately started to not only maintain it, but improve it. They replaced the siding, they added an addition. They went to work on the home to improve and maintain the home from the original state where they bought it. Again, very small piece of property, but it is what it is. Because they, again, care about the look of their home and what it looks like. As they were doing this, their neighbor, of course, very similar style home, basically the same age and most likely the exact same builder, their home was far more run down than, of course, their neighbors who were not only maintaining their home, but improving it. And they share a property line, very specifically a fence line. Now, if you've ever seen an episode of Judge Judy before, you would know that this kind of squabble is one of those things that actually gets taken to court on a regular basis, because in the end, you're talking about a difference in IQ. Although this particular difference is not race-related, it just happens to be a genetic difference, and certainly a common sense difference. The fence that separates these two properties is a run-down chain-link fence. It's rusted out, it's in bad shape, it looks terrible. Anybody walking past would be like, wow, look at that nice house. And then they'd go, wow, look at that terrible fence dividing that nice house from that not nice house. I mean, it's obvious. But at the exact same time, an offer was made to the individuals who lived in the more run-down home by the individuals who were, again, living in the home that they were fixing and improving greatly, and they offered to pay for a brand new fence that would divide their property. Because the people living in the home that they just bought, that they were, of course, fixing and then maintaining, they didn't want to look at this old run-down fence anymore. And rightfully so. So much so that they offered to have it removed at their own cost, at no cost to their neighbors, and then replace it with something that's much more visually appealing and updated. They asked the neighbor if they could do that, and the neighbor looked at them and said, no. Leave the fence the way that it is. Do not change it. Again, that's an intelligence difference. What the work of Dr. Watson and many others before him, and certainly those after, would continue to, of course, contest and maintain, basically, is that the more that you get those differences, certainly of opinion and or intelligence and genetic differences, to not include race in that is foolish, because that too is a difference, thereby bringing in other differences on how something, again, should be maintained or built or not built, or how something should look or not look. This is, again, why cultures exist and cultures are different. This is the poisonous nature of what is, of course, considered the melting pot, which is a Jewish ideology. It's satanic, actually, to take very specific, purposeful differences of individuals and then mold them all together to create basically a giant bowl of slop. Again, so that ultimately you don't notice any differences in cultures, that there just becomes a one culture or a one world government larger picture. And that's a huge problem. Cultural differences exist on purpose, just like racial differences exist on purpose. It's not that it's a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Of course not. It would never be. What's the road in Philadelphia? Is it Kingston Avenue? Is that the famous road that exists when it comes to drug use? And individuals, again, on YouTube make endless videos about it, driving up and down Kingston Avenue. And you see all of these individuals, again, full-blown drug addicts, completely tranquilized, bent over, sleeping, standing up. I mean, it's endless horrific sights that are actually rather famous for that particular area now, which is unfortunate. But when you see that, you'll see every race imaginable. But what are they all doing? They're all doing the same things. They're in the same geographic location and they're doing the same things. And it just so happens that the things that they're doing are tranquilizing themselves from being able to notice anything else around them. So the result that everybody sees is exactly the same. White drug addicts, black drug addicts, Hispanic drug addicts, and they're all just bent over, again, completely tranquilized. So again, it's not that it's a race thing per se. It is genetic by and large, but you can't take the race element out of the equation. Because again, when one race enters the environment of another, any behaviors that exist sometimes within that particular race are going to bleed over into the other races who again are now a part of that particular area. The lesson here too, and just in conclusion to wrap this up, is you never apologize. The mistake that Dr. Watson made was sort of, well, he didn't full-blown apologize. I mean, he still had plenty of common sense many years ago, of course, and he had common sense, period. But to even be asked to apologize, or, have you thought about the feelings you might have hurt as a result of that scientific study that you conducted, or those scientific comments that you made, or whatever else, or referencing accurate history? If a person is asked to apologize for knowing facts that do not fit within the belief system of someone who feels instead of thinking, then what you do is you double down. You never apologize for knowing more than what someone else may or may not know. Someone else's ability or inability to learn is their own problem. It doesn't have to be yours. So, Dr. Watson didn't dumb himself down. Again, even in his later years, he openly repeated it consistently, that he was right, that it is an element, and as I just read, it's a historically accurate element that does create differences, and differences in genetic patterns is race. It has to be taken into consideration. Again, take Jews, for example. Not bashing them necessarily, but, it's worth mentioning that there is an entire subcategory of Jewish illness that exists, and that these subcategories specifically have to do with inbreeding. That there are birth abnormalities and facial structure and genetic abnormalities that occur among the Jewish race because they, among many others, although it's primarily them, inbreed like nobody's business. They sleep with each other's brothers and sisters. They sleep with each other's cousins. This is something that happens. And when that happens, of course, much like a deer in the woods that has 3 sets of antlers, that's one of the things that, of course, causes those abnormalities among that species of animal. It isn't any different with human beings. The same thing does happen. And, of course, when those individuals are around one another in close geographic proximity, that kind of behavior will be tolerated. So yeah, race, behavior, genetics, geographic location. All of it plays a role. All of it plays a role in IQ. All of it plays a role in decision making. It plays a role in ethics, values, culture, all of it. It's always been that way. It's not going to change. But that, unfortunately, again, in such subjects are exactly what also expose the degenerate aspect of so-called quote-unquote science, or the science authority, or the science community. It proves again that many individuals behind those elements and behind those organizations are not interested in the truth. They're just interested in thought control. And therein lies a much larger problem. Now, speaking of thought control, let me get into education here, because there's been a lot of it. And I actually want to bring up these stories almost in backwards order here. First of all, there was a story on One American News here, which is rather interesting. And this, I think, in a nutshell, I put this out on my social media pages, but, this in a nutshell should break down the level of decision-making that goes on in American K-12 schools, the districts, and, of course, the individuals who work within. Certainly how the I would say the squeakiest wheel tends to get the grease, although in this particular case, they lost, and they lost in a federal appeals court. This was from One America News, and I'm very familiar with this school district because this is a neighboring school district to the Westerville City Schools in central Ohio. Again, I believe it's the 6th largest school district in Ohio. It was titled the following here: Federal Appeals Court, Ohio School District can't discipline students who won't use others' preferred pronouns. This is specifically the Olentangy public school system. And this was from Friday here on November 7th, and it says the following: a federal appeals court in Ohio ruled against the 4th largest, my apologies, I think I said 6th, 4th largest school district in the state, deciding that the district may not punish students for using biological pronouns. Specifically, of course, pronouns aligned with a person's biological sex or gender. Related language, even if other students find the language offensive or derogatory. This means that students cannot be reprimanded for purposefully misgendering, quote unquote, other gender dysphoric students who choose to identify as the opposite sex. Again, I want to read this whole thing because, well, it's not very long, but this right here again should show people the state of the kinds of people, the mental state certainly, and the behavioral state of the kinds of people that work in this business. They decided to take this all the way to the Ohio Supreme Court in an effort to basically say, we as a public institution have the right to discipline and or suspend and or expel any other students who don't pretend along with us. It's completely nuts. But again, the people in this area and areas like it would view this again as a victory. And they would say, good, this is a victory for free speech. This is a victory for our rights. This is a victory for all of us who have common sense and our heads on our shoulders. And they would be right, except they're still attending the same brainwashing facility that put this forth in the first place. So much so that they wanted to attempt to make this law. It says the 6th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the Olentangy Local School District cannot bar students from using gender-specific language that others may find offensive during a 10-7 decision on Thursday, where the court sided with the group Parents Defending Education. They said the following here, quote, Defending Education is a national grassroots nonprofit empowering parents to advocate for classrooms that educate, not indoctrinate, according to the group's website. The organization first filed a suit against Olentangy in 2023, arguing that the district's policies that required the use of peers' preferred pronouns were a violation of students' rights under the First and 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. They would be correct. It says, quote, Our society continues to debate whether biological pronouns are appropriate or offensive, just as it continues to debate many other issues surrounding transgender rights, unquote. Thursday's ruling said, written by Circuit Judge Eric Murphy for the majority, quote, The school district may not skew this debate by forcing one side to change the way it conveys its message or by compelling it to express a different view, unquote. The court believed the district had fallen short of upholding a standard that allowed speech that would materially and substantially disrupt school activities or infringe on the legal rights of others in the community. The judges also noted that the district failed to provide substantial evidence that the use of biological pronouns would disrupt school functions or qualify as harassment. Said, quote, Common sense says that Olentangy's policies aren't helping students by compelling their peers to parrot words they don't really believe, said Cam Norris, an attorney for Parents Defending Education. Quote, They are harming them by teaching them that different worldviews should be silenced and banned, not understood and rebuted, unquote. Thursday's ruling reversed a decision made by the 3-judge panel of the 6th Circuit Court in July of 2024. The previous ruling found that the school district had shown that its prohibited speech would disrupt classroom activities. Again, it's a squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of mentality, that everybody has to cater to the mentally ill minority at the expense of the vast majority who have their heads on straight. This is a huge problem. It's a massive problem. These people are not well, but again, this is the environment. Birds of a feather flock together. These kinds of people, again, operate within the same kinds of environment, creating these hive mind mentalities, and then before you know it, they can sniff out a person who doesn't behave or talk or look or act like them, and then they're not allowed in. Hence discriminatory hiring practices and so on and so forth. But it's just brainwashed ideology, period, proving again that it's the blind leading the blind. Let me give you another example, and this one is beyond disturbing, although shouldn't surprise anybody, certainly not from California. This was from the California Family Council, or California-family.org, and it was titled, California Teachers Forced into LGBTQ Loyalty Test, quote unquote, that labels Christian beliefs as bigotry. It says, in accordance with a law passed in 2023 that has now gone into effect, the California school system requires all 7th through 12th grade teachers and certified school employees to undergo annual LGBTQ cultural competency training and testing. Why a person, again, would want to be a school teacher in California is beyond me, unless, of course, you're one of them. You're completely brainwashed. You're an NPC with no inner monologue, no conscience. You don't know the difference between right and wrong. And you view all of this as being acceptable. It says, developed by activist organizations, and there are many of them, the training labels those with traditional Christian beliefs about sexuality and biological sex as homophobic, quote unquote, or transphobic, quote unquote. It instructs employees to protect students' privacy from their own parents and to use so-called preferred pronouns such as they, them, or ze, them. Again, it's a foreign language because they're crazy. It says the training also tests school employees to ensure that they can parrot back the state-approved beliefs about sexual orientation and gender ideology. It's a brainwashing camp. And you need the brainwashed to deliver the brainwashing instruction. Because without them, the ultimate mission, again, will not be complete. The idea is to brainwash youth, and the best way to do that is to use brainwashed adults. This is, again, beyond alarming. Now, as far as these committees are concerned and all of these groups that are affiliated with all of this so-called instruction, this is a perfect example, again, of when anybody says that our school is successful because of the hard work of teachers, administrators, and school boards. Whenever they say that, they're lying. Because all of those individuals also, or I should say they're not just lying, they're being misled and they're repeating something that isn't true. Because even they are being manipulated by endless organizations with or without their knowledge. With or without their ability to even think about all of the negative influence that's taking place that's manipulating these individuals, all of them, the adults doing the so-called instructing, and then again, the minors who are doing the so-called learning within these environments. For example, what they have highlighted here as the PRISM Advisory Committee is made up of all of these different NGOs. I'm going to list them all off right now. Some of these you've heard of, no doubt about it. The Los Angeles County Office of Education, that's one. The California Department of Education, of course. The California Teachers Association, the California State PTA, Every Child, One Voice, which of course means communism. The CFT, a union of educators and classified professionals, the Alliance for Children's Rights, and of course, the ACLU of Southern California, the Center, LGBTQ Community Center of the Desert, if I'm saying that right, Dolores Hutera Foundation for Community Organizing, Marxism, Communism, It's everywhere, and we're not even half done. Equality California is another one. Facing History and Ourselves is another one. GSA Network is another one. The Human Rights Campaign, Welcoming Schools is another one. The LGBTQ Center is another one. Los Angeles LGBT Center is another one. One Institute is another name. Our Family Coalition, Safe Schools Project, the SDSU Research Foundation, The Source, an LGBTQ plus center, and then finally the Trevor Project. They're all communists, they're all gay, they're all Marxists, they all work together, and they all infiltrate every single K-12 environment and, of course, university environment, thereby proving that you really don't need just one of them for the entire environment to exist and be degenerate. You don't need, really, the Federal Department of Education. You really don't need a State Department of Education. All you need are these NGOs that surround and strangle these institutions and then infiltrate them one at a time. Now, here are some of the curriculum themes, and these are equally as ridiculous. Again, using preferred pronouns, of course, is one of them. Teachers are told that they must promote safety and well-being by using each child's chosen pronouns. They have a giant scale here. Heterosexism is bigotry is another one. The training claims that believing heterosexual relationships are normal is a form of discrimination called heteronormativity. I'm telling you, you live in these places and you attend these environments, they will eat you up. This is exactly how these environments and the people who are in them lack a frontal cortex and ability to think and say the reason that our school sucks when it comes to, of course, learning real information and the truth is because we're filling our entire time with this nonsense. The next one, keeping secrets from parents. The curriculum insists that teachers cannot disclose a student's gender identity or orientation to parents, asserting that the child have a reasonable expectation of privacy from their families, unquote. Yeah, it's called sexual grooming because government wants to be the parent all the time, every day. And then government wants to not only groom them, but sexually abuse them when they become, of course, old enough to be sexually abused, or they'll just cut to the chase and sexually abuse them when they're minors inside of said environment, and then trick the minor into believing that it's normal and that it's okay. The next one, requiring gender affirmation. Employees are told to affirm a child's chosen identity, including social, legal, and medical gender affirmation, despite global pushback against such policies and the growing number of detransitioners warning of regret. Perfect. Don't pay attention to facts. Don't pay attention to people who have already been through your grooming process. Don't pay attention to them, young students. Those people are wrong. We are right. Let us chop your genitals off and everything will be okay. And by the way, don't tell your parents. I've written about it on Substack numerous times that the end game for this entire agenda, which of course is highly satanic, the end game is to mutilate minors, brainwash them, mutilate them either by their own hand or trick them into mutilating themselves, create endless confusion, because again, Satan is the father of confusion. And his followers, of course, love to sow confusion into the minds of minors. And of course, as mentioned earlier, Satan loves to use the confused adults, who are, of course, also satanic by and large and or just of low IQ, to then, of course, bring all of this to minors themselves, thereby misleading them or flat out lying to them, to, of course, get them to be stripped away from their own families and their own parents, and then that leads to thoughts of suicide, depression, anxiety, drug addiction, sexual promiscuity, and early death. That right there is the American K-12 school system in a nutshell. The article wraps up here. It says California Family Council Vice President Greg Burt said that the PRISM curriculum represents a dangerous escalation in government-led indoctrination. I think that's putting it mildly. Quote, parents, pastors, and Christian teachers need to sound the alarm. This so-called training isn't about inclusion, it's about indoctrination. Oh, it's about worse than that. It's ultimately about murder and suicide. It's designed to shame anyone who holds biblical beliefs about sex, marriage, and what it means to be male or female. The state is funding a world view that breeds hostility towards Christianity and undermines the moral foundation of our schools and families, unquote. Burt urged parents to get informed and involved in their local districts. Silence is not an option. California's Christian community must stand up for the truth and the rights of parents to raise their children without government interference. The only way that happens is by leaving. That's it. The only way that is accomplished is by leaving the environment. It is not accomplished by trying to change the minds of the people who exist within the K-12 environment that is adopting this in the first place. You cannot change the minds of these employees and these so-called administrators or teachers or school board members. You cannot change their minds. They're far too gone. Let me give you another example, and this again is perfect psychological projection. And no one engages in it quite, of course, like the left, and people on the right do too, but I should say that certainly the sexual degenerates are the ones that engage in it the most. There was a story here from a couple of weeks back, and it had to do with a former Maine school board member who is, again, remarkably left-leaning and completely insane. They spoke out at a school board meeting, and they basically said that anybody who is quote-unquote obsessed with what private parts are sitting in between the legs of our students is nothing less than creepy and should absolutely be raising eyebrows in and around our school district. They're basically saying that, again, obsessing about all of this gender indoctrination and sexual grooming and all of it, that those of us who are on the right side of this issue, trying to save these children from these adults who are grooming them sexually, that we are somehow pedophiles. That's their entire thing. That's their whole argument. The only reason that they're obsessed about it and talk about it all the time is because they have sexual problems themselves and they're the sexual degenerates. Again, it's psychological projection like nobody's business. I mean, look at the people bringing up these arguments. Look at the people trying to defend the sexual degeneracy of minors and the sexual indoctrination of minors. They're disgusting. No one's touched these people with the 10-foot pole. So again, when it comes to being sexually inadequate, or again, somehow being obsessed with sex, we're not the ones putting the books in the libraries. We're not the ones making excuses for the teachers who have them available in their classrooms. We're the ones who want to burn all of those books. We're the ones who want to make sure that those kinds of books in a good, clean, civil society that is law-abiding don't even make those books available. That individuals who want to publish such books never get the chance. So no. It has nothing to do with us being obsessed with sex. It has to do with us hating the devil and not liking the people who follow his will without a moment's thought, without any inner monologue or any conscience or any ability to reflect or learn. And us not tolerating that isn't a problem. We don't view it as being a problem. We view it as, of course, being 100% accurate and 100% right, because what is being pushed on American youth is disgusting. It's beyond disgusting, and it's being tolerated in endless environments. It's not just sex-related either, it's violence. The larger umbrella is violence, and of course, all of the elements that violence carries with it. You may recall this story from whatever it was, at least a couple of years ago. I covered it here on the show as well, of the white Virginia elementary school teacher who was shot in the stomach by her 6-year-old student at the time, who happened to be black. Pulls a gun out of his bag, shoots his teacher in the gut, and then puts the gun back in the bag and walks around school. And other people again knew that the child had the gun in his bag and didn't do anything about it, including administration. While the teacher, of course, went off to the hospital for a gunshot wound. They ended up putting the mom in prison of the black child who shot the white teacher because, of course, she didn't have her gun locked away properly, or the minor had access to the gun, stole the gun, clearly, but she ended up going to jail for child neglect or something along those lines. Anyway, this particular Virginia teacher has now been awarded $10 million. And again, therein lies the business in a nutshell. We want to try to cover up the fact that one of our white school teachers was shot in the stomach by one of our students. And let's just try to downplay it. And, well, it was an accident and it's not that big of a deal. And then let's try to hide that. Like that's something that can actually be hidden. Again, it was the ex-assistant now, principal, again, who was responsible for attempting to hide some of this. It's absolutely nuts. If they can attempt to hide that, think of what they actually do hide. All of the very serious incidents of actual school violence, or unprofessional behavior, or sexual degeneracy, or XYZ that gets buried. Again, as I've said before, it's a mentality, it's a mental state within these environments. That's the first approach to take. It's not the company line, and it's not the legal line that they say. See something, say something. That's what the local school district always says in the town where I live. That's our policy. See something, say something. But if you do, then you're the problem. If you call them out, then you're the problem. If you say something wasn't done properly, then you're the problem. That's the double standard. And it's constant. It's a constant double standard. Now, one more education story here, and this is a positive one. And I just wish that another move would be made, which is instead of these baptisms happening on university campuses, which again I think is a fantastic thing, and I'll never criticize it. And I'm not certainly criticizing it here. I'm simply saying take it to the next level. If you're going to get baptized as college students en masse, which is something, again, that has been happening here with regularity on college campuses for quite some time. In fact, I'll take it a step further. I've noticed a particular thing, and I actually jumped the gun on this, my apologies, but I've decided to start watching a little bit of college football here before Thanksgiving and the Thanksgiving break, just to kind of catch myself up. But I've noticed a particular pattern. You have more and more college players being interviewed by these network, sports people on the sidelines or after the game or what have you, and they're referencing Jesus Christ with regularity. I think this is a very good thing. It's very good. Out of the gate, they immediately give thanks to Jesus Christ. We wouldn't be here without him. And then they start talking about the game, and then they bookend it again with comments about Jesus Christ and their faith and all glory to God and all of that. That's excellent. That's excellent that's happening. The quarterback for Indiana did it just the other day at the end of the game when they beat Penn State, which was one hell of a football game. But either way, this was from, let me see here, a CalebPark.com, and it was titled Jesus Lifted High, Hundreds Baptized at the University of Cincinnati Revival. It says, while the mainstream media focuses on division and despair, a powerful grassroots revival is sweeping a college campus in Ohio, and the images are going viral. On Wednesday night, more than 5,500 students gathered at the University of Cincinnati for a Unite Us worship event. But this was no ordinary gathering. It was a genuine move of God, culminating in hundreds of students being baptized in truck beds outside the Reds baseball stadium. That's very cool. That's a very good thing. I hope they didn't have to pay. I hope that it was legit. I hope it's not some kind of a grift of some kind. But that, again, these individuals went there, were able to go there freely, meet new people, have a healthy time, and praise Jesus. Again, it's a great thing. I love it. I would just love to see them get baptized and then leave the university setting if they are, again, university students. Just walk away. Every time things like this happen, of course, because we're living in a spiritual battle, every single time something like this happens, it's the Marxist, communist, godless, satanic institution that will double down on their policies, their behavior, and then do whatever they have to do, of course, to push back. But if you're not there, certainly after the baptism, if you choose to leave, acquire an education online, which is equally as accredited as anything in a brick-and-mortar institution. Not only is it cheaper, of course, as I've said before, but you'll graduate far sooner. Then you won't give them a target to hit. You won't be giving them an avenue to attack because you won't be there anymore. So it's moves like that, again, in my opinion, that I'd like to see a lot of these students do, and I wish that those stories would again be publicized and more people would do that in mass. Have a massive revival, and then have a massive exodus, and just leave. But it's clear again that one of the things that's keeping these individuals from leaving is a lack of knowing where to go or knowing that there are other options, even though those options are right in front of their face. Even, again, during some of these college football games on television, during the actual commercials where they show online universities, like Purdue Global University, for example. They run these commercials all the time. It's like they're showing you that you don't have to be a part of those environments. You don't have to be a part of that hive mind. You don't have to dress up and be a cheerleader for a football team and do the exact same thing as the person next to you in XYZ. You don't have to maintain that brainwashed culture. You can leave. It's doable. It will be far less expensive. You'll save copious amounts of money. So will your families and anybody else who's paying for it. You'll have far less debt, and you'll be done in a shorter amount of time. So, again, a mass exodus has got to happen eventually. Again, the mass revivals are very, very good. There is no doubt that that is the work of Christ himself, because it's been a long time coming. It's something, of course, that hasn't been happening, certainly in recent decades, but it's happening now, which is good. It's a good form of peer pressure. Of course, as long as people aren't being grifted and they're not losing money or having their money stolen as a result of attending such things. But yeah, beyond that, I'm 100% for it. I'll end with this. Couple of things real quick. There was a study out of Germany having to do with jab-related PCR tests, and wouldn't you know it, not only, of course, is this a long-standing fact that we've known long before 2020, but the PCR test, of course, is fake and COVID doesn't exist. So much so that there was a 10-to-1 ratio when it came to testing for so-called COVID with PCR tests. And approximately only one would show up so-called positive for COVID, whereas the rest did not, thereby proving one or both, and it's both, conclusions or hypotheses that, of course, COVID doesn't exist and the test is fraudulent. It's openly been said again that the PCR test doesn't test for COVID, which again begs the question, does COVID even exist? What is it actually even testing? And the answer, of course, is nothing. They're just taking people who have symptoms of being ill, symptoms of not being ill, they're testing them, and of the individuals who have symptoms of being ill, the test is completely inaccurate because it's only showing up so-called positive among 1 out of the 10 who are ill. Again, the jury is in on this. The scientific method has been wrung dry. I think most people at this stage of the game, again with a brain in their skull, should understand what's been happening here. It's arguably one of the largest medical frauds on a massive scale that we've ever seen, certainly within our generation, where it was forced upon us in such an absurd way. In fact, this is part of the thing that grinds my gears also. Certainly when it comes to a narrative control standpoint, is you have the people like the Brett Weinsteins of the world show up on Joe Rogan's show and just pretend like he lives on top of a mountain and he's some all-seeing eye and all-knowing and omnipotent, and he just has it all figured out. As it turns out, again, the Brett Weinsteins of the world who are claiming to be these knowledgeable scientific individuals when he never even taught the subject at Evergreen State College. But he wore the mask. He wore the mask. To my knowledge, he took the shots. He played the game. And he told everybody to do the same. Now he comes around on the back end and he goes, "Oh, I just can't believe that this is just massive tyranny on a massive scale." And people are still talking about it, but there's been no accountability. There's still been no accountability. However, with that said, one of the ways I think that you can hold these people accountable, and it could be happening, is you hit them right in the pocketbook. Again, last Friday, or Thursday it was, when Donald Trump was having that meeting in the Oval Office where the man collapsed from one of the pharmaceutical industries. Again, the timing was palpable, but he was specifically, of course, talking about lowering the cost and working with these companies to lower the cost of what he calls the fat drugs or the fat shots. I love the fact that he calls it that. It's very funny because he's putting down the company and the product before he signs a deal or cuts a deal with these companies for their poisonous product. And then in an audio clip, he turns to Robert Kennedy Jr. and he says, "What do you think, Bobby?" He goes, "Have we heard anything bad about these shots before? I don't know if we have or we haven't. I'm not sure." And he just stares at Robert Kennedy Jr. And Kennedy doesn't say anything back because Kennedy knows, because Trump knows. Trump calls them the fat shots, for God's sakes. He knows, again, he knows it's a poisonous product. He knows it's a bad product. That's his approach of downplaying the fact that no one should take those shots. He can say 1,000 complimentary quote-unquote things around it, but he goes, they're the fat shots. Who cares? I call them the fat drugs. And Kennedy, of course, has been out there and very vocal about how those shot makers and the makers, specifically the patents for those weight loss shots, not only alter DNA, but they're held in Switzerland, if memory serves, and they can't be held accountable for hurting people. They're incredibly dangerous. And like, again, college football commercials, those commercials are still on TV, listing all of these horrific side effects, while they have these so-called smiling and healthy people walking around like, "Hey, I'm in great shape." And it's like, oh, by the way, you might die. And it's going to alter your DNA and, organ failure and whatever else. But hey, look at these smiling people, walking on rocks and lily pads and up mountains and XYZ and being active. But Trump calls them the fat shots. And people can't read through the lines here. They can't see in between the lines. It's crystal clear that they know that they're bad for people. But this is the point. The point is that we're not supposed to do what government certainly wants us to do just because a person in a governmental position says, "Hey, these are cheap. Hey, these are healthy. Hey, these are fine," doesn't mean that they are. Certainly not when the President of the United States is putting down the product by making fun of them with a name, like calling them fat shots. That's hilarious. That's not going to help that company's stock. Again, it's like calling a cheeseburger a fat burger. Hey, enjoy your fat, stupid burgers, as he's promoting a particular hamburger company. Again, it's not a good look. And notice how no one interrupted him when he said it either. No one stopped him. Go back and watch the clip. I'm telling you, it's hilarious. I put it in the last war video. The CEO of Eli Lilly didn't even stop him and be like, "Mr. President, we would really appreciate it if you would stop calling them the fat shots and the fat drugs. It's kind of disrespectful and whatever else." They don't even stop him. They just look at him like, all right. And again, they go on with their deal, and that's the end of it. So everybody has a choice to make. But again, if following government is your choice, that only has one dead end. Emphasis on the word dead, emphasis on the word end. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening as always. I'll catch you on Wednesday. Peace. Thank you for listening to American Education FM. Make sure and check out AmericanEducationFM.com for more information. Take care and God bless.